Dead men don't speak. We've all heard this saying at some point in our lives. Usually it's uttered by an old, frail woman when you ask her something about her long-gone husband, or perhaps a gruff old man who has clearly seen better days. And yet we often see these so-called wise elders pass on this nugget of wisdom. So then why are dead people always coming back to talk to us? From ghosts to demons to that one time Uncle Billy got up from his seat after drinking a little too much at Thanksgiving dinner. Dead men, women, children, monsters, they do speak. They tell jokes, share gossip, and occasionally just drop by for a quick chat. They might even have something important to say. Sure, you can always try pretending you didn't hear them. If they're not tied to the mortal plane, they may not be able to force you to listen, but there's no guarantee you'll be able to avoid them altogether. Let's take a look at some stories where the dearly departed decided to break their silence. The quiet old lady sitting in the rocking chair next to you is probably harmless. She might be a little hard of hearing. Maybe she liked to rock. Who are you to judge? But if you've just been served tea, and the kettle hasn't been switched off, and the old lady turns to you with a smile on her face and a burning kettle in her hands, you should probably start worrying. If you notice her skin is unnaturally green, it's likely your story will end here. But if she's just an old lady with a taste for the macabre, you have a chance. Just stay calm, grab the kettle, and get ready to make a run for the door. All while maintaining eye contact with the old lady. It won't be easy. Old people are fast. But what if you could stop her before she even started her murderous rampage? What if you could nip this whole situation in the bud and prevent her from ever becoming an undead abomination in the first place? Well, you would need the right equipment and some skills. And fortunately for you, those things exist. You don't have to worry about being unprepared anymore, because today's sponsor has everything you need. And what's more, if you use code GAMERMELT, you'll save 25% on your order. Now back to our terrifying tale. Have you ever had a conversation with someone only to realize later that they were being intentionally vague? They kept things open-ended. Never gave you a straight answer, and generally made you feel like you weren't worthy of the truth. Well, it happens a lot when talking to certain ghosts. Take the case of Paul Revere, for example. He famously rode his horse through the night shouting the British are coming. At least that's how the song goes. The truth was far less poetic. According to those who knew him, he cried out, "Beware, the redcoats are coming," which is a pretty big difference considering the British Army was already in America. Paul wasn't warning the locals that the British were on their way. He was telling them to hide their liquor because the British soldiers were known for raiding taverns and wasting perfectly good beer. In short, Paul Revere was being vague to protect his friends and loved ones. Why did he bother warning people about the British Army? Because he was trying to rally them to fight back against the oppressive monarchy. And despite the fact that he died in 1818, he's still trying to rouse patriots to action to this day. But what if you want to keep things nice and friendly with the ghost haunting you? No one understands the value of keeping things civil with the undead more than Chris Gugas. In 2016, he moved into a house in New Orleans only to find out it had a ghost named Helen. Helen was a friendly spirit and had no qualms about letting Chris know she was there. Sometimes she shook his bed, and other times she even went so far as to interact with his phone. But Chris was a cool dude. Instead of spending his days locking himself in the bathroom and crossing his fingers that Helen would move on, he started talking to her. And you know what? It worked. After months of casual chatter, Chris and Helen became friends, and eventually he even introduced her to his girlfriend. Yep, Chris, Helen, and his girlfriend became a trio. A living guy and a ghost girl, best friends. It just goes to show that sometimes dead men do want to speak. They just need someone to listen. However, sometimes dead men want to speak because they have unfinished business. In the Philippines, they call it aneng muerto. This involves the spirit of someone who recently died returning to their home and communicating with family members to inform them of their death. It's common for families to wait several days before burying a loved one. So the spirits return to let their families know they're dead and should be buried. Some believe this is actually a way for the spirits to check up on their grieving family members. In Filipino culture, it's common to mourn for up to 9 days, a practice called the novena. Aneng muerto is considered a sign of respect for the dead and a way for families to cope with loss. But it can also be a bit unnerving when someone returns from the dead to haunt you. Imagine you're going about your day when suddenly the television turns on by itself and a shadowy figure appears on the screen. You shake it off, assuming it's just a glitch. But then the same thing happens on every TV in the house. It's not a glitch. It's your dead father come to talk to you. Yep, you heard correctly. Televisions are apparently one of the preferred methods of communicating with the dearly departed. Sure, you can use radios, phones, mirrors, and even computers. But if your dad is a real piece of work, he'll use every TV in your house to deliver his message. Fortunately for one YouTuber, his message was relatively mundane. His father wanted him to buy some milk on the way home. But sometimes dead men come back to talk to you because they're mad. After serving in World War II, George Wilson returned home to England and married the love of his life. Soon they were blessed with a son and life was good. Then one day his son drowned in a boating accident. George was devastated, but he understood accidents happen and eventually he moved on. However, decades later, he received a phone call from his son. He explained that he needed his father's help and then hung up. Confused, George called back, but the number was disconnected. Was he having a mental breakdown? Had he lost his mind from all those years fighting in the war? He couldn't tell. But he soon received another phone call from his son, and then another, and then another. Each time George answered, his son would hang up before he could respond. Then one day the calls stopped. Years passed and George died believing it was just a wacky prank played by some bored teenagers. But it wasn't. Not long after George died, his son called again. And when he finally reached his father, he had a message. "Why didn't you save me?" He screamed. It seems that in death, his son still resented his father for not saving him when he drowned all those years ago. Some say dead men speak to warn us about the future. Known simply as Old Joe, this homeless man haunted the streets of London for decades. He was a fixture in the area, and people knew him well. So, when he died in 1985, people were surprised. What happened to Old Joe? They say his spirit haunts the train tracks near Waterloo Station, and he is often spotted sitting on a nearby bridge. But he isn't just a harmless ghost. There's a tragic story behind Old Joe, and he wants you to hear it. See, he's not actually dead. He's just stuck on the mortal plane, forever waiting for the train that killed him to pass so he can finally move on. But Old Joe has another purpose. He wants to warn travelers not to jump in front of moving trains. Yes, he is a cautionary spirit whose sole purpose is to convince people that jumping in front of a moving train is a bad idea. Whether he's successful or not is unknown, but you should definitely take his advice. So remember, dead men do talk. Sometimes they want to be left alone. Other times they just want to say hi. And occasionally they just want to tell you that you're doing a terrible job at your job. And you should probably quit.